It was just over 100 years ago, in the obscure village of Crag's Peak, that a lonely old man died in a wretched rooming house. His death would have likely gone unnoticed if it weren't for a tattered manuscript found among the old man's few possessions. The owner gave the manuscript to the new tenant, who in turn sold it at a local tavern for a few copper pieces, little knowing that these tattered pages would become a celebrated literary work and would spark a treasure hunt that would last for decades to come. For this old man was a rogue named Salazin, and his story of a urchin who rises up from nowhere and has adventures across the New World captivated readers across the continent. For it told the story of desperate thieves who come across the score of a lifetime, only to find themselves ruined by jealousy and greed. They turned upon each other and lost everything. And Salazin claimed that there were clues in his book that would lead an astute reader to the treasure that they had hidden. And so copies of the manuscript spread across the continent, and groups of adventurers used this to search for the treasure, but found nothing. No one could unlock the secrets of this book and discover the magnificent hoard. And so a new legend arose. Readers of different copies began to realize that their words were changed, passages omitted, things moved around, and it became the quest for people to find the original manuscript. That must be the key. But how to find it? That, my friends, is the perfect task for the players in a homebrewed D&D campaign. Hello again, folks. KR King here, helping you homebrew your own D&D campaign. So today I am continuing my series on creating a treasure map. And last time I discussed some classic treasure types, and then I went over the questions that you ask yourself as a GM when creating a treasure and a treasure map, such that you have a template to use to apply to one of these treasure types. And this video actually comes from a comment, longtime viewer of mine, Joel Anderson, who asked me who was going to create a treasure type in a book. I mentioned the old, a map glued between pages trope. He said, well, what's this about? And so I gave a comment on it. And I realized, hey, why not use that trope, the map glued to pages, to kind of go over one of these lost treasure things, and a video was born. Because, while in some sense all maps tell a story in terms of the geography that they show or the features that they emphasize, a treasure map has an extra story because there's an adventure behind it, right? The discovery of a treasure, the need to hide it, and the idea that whoever drew the map wants to go back someday and reclaim the loot. And the thing about, creating a treasure map that's going to be secreted inside a book is that book kind of forces you in a way to come up with a story that adheres to the template that I talked about. Who was it that found the treasure? Why do they need to hide it? Who made the map? What relation is to it? Where is this treasure located? And what is the treasure? And the story of that treasure should lend itself both to the, existence of this book, but also why the author, felt the need to glue it inside. So in my introduction, I create this character of Salazin, right? He's the last surviving member of this bandit group. He's a rogue, and he leaves this manuscript which details his life and how he, fell in with these bandits and some of their adventures leading up to the discovery of this treasure. And this is kind of in the tradition of the bandits of the Old West. Think of the Hole in the Wall gang or the James Younger gang. But here, Salazin teases the reader. He claims that somewhere in this book, and in fact he gives an exact location, is the secret to discovering this treasure. But he doesn't say I've glued the map to the pages. And what I did here was I created the conceit of multiple copies, right? Why wouldn't this be copied? Well, once these multiple copies spread out, none of them are going to have the map glued to one of the pages. And then I put the events of Salazin and his gang 100, to 150 something in there, years before the time of the players. I create temporal distance. This is a classic storytelling and game mechanic device that you really want to think about when you're homebrewing, when you're creating, legends and histories of your own world. All right, so what I'm going to do is, in terms of this treasure, I'm going to create a poison pill style treasure that Salazin and his gang come across. This will justify why they hid the treasure, and why they never got back to it to dig it out, as we'll see in their story. So basically, a poison pill treasure occurs when small-time criminals come across loot that's way above their pay grade. The big score! You know, historical examples would include the Lufthansa robbery that was covered in the film Goodfellas, the Brinks job, which occurred in Boston in the 1950s, and the Great Train robbery that occurred in England in the 60s. You know, and so in each of these cases, these robbers came across an immense sum, which brought tremendous heat from the authorities, and which made it almost impossible to fence, to get rid of. And so what happened was it sowed internal divisions within the gang. People started killing each other off, or people started, they got caught and they confessed and all this sort of thing. But some of these criminals claim that they would do it all again. The thing about the poison pill treasure is, the pill itself, the excitement and, thrill of getting this treasure is worth the toxicity of the poison, betrayal and prison time. The other thing is the poison pill treasure lends itself to the temporal distance that I talked about, where, you want this robbery to have occurred 100 or 200 or, some period beforehand, because if it occurred, within a couple of years, the victim of this robbery, they're going to want, their loot back. And the items in the robbery are going to be very identifiable and very difficult to sell. If you go to somebody and try to trade the crown jewels for gems and jewels, they'll be like, oh yeah, just wait right there, right? They're going to get the authorities. But if 100 or 300 years or whatever have gone by, there's a much greater chance that that treasure is in the public domain, as it were. And another great thing that this temporal distance does is it elevates this treasure to legendary status, right? Generations of readers have, followed Salazin's story and dreamed of finding the treasure. Scores of, individuals and groups or whatever have in fact searched, have tried to use the clues in the books, and nothing has happened. No one has found it, which then gives rise to the alternative theory, hey, this treasure is a hoax. Salazin was just trying to justify kind of a wasted life, finding himself living on a few copper a week in a hovel, and he writes this incredible tale. But the thing is, as we know in D&D, there are no hoax treasures. The other thing that temporal distance, of course, does, it allows for geographic change, whether it's through weather or activity, earthquakes or floods or whatever, that can distort the landscape and make, the fact that it hasn't been found have more verisimilitude. All right, so a classic poison pill treasure in the world of D&D is the King's Ransom. This is where a huge amount of treasure is, assembled for either said ransom for a noble or something. It could be for the dowry of, there's a marriage between two kingdoms. It could be some kind of payment for something, some kind of bribe or something that's owed. But in all cases, it's a very large treasure controlled by powerful figures who have the means to, guard the treasure initially, but to punish anyone who would dare steal it. But the thing is, this treasure has to be transported from point A to point B, and this is where it could be lost. If you're at sea, you might run into, a big storm and have a shipwreck. You might run into pirates or some kind of monsters or something. And if you're transported by land, you could also run into the same sort of things, monsters or NPCs or somebody that take the treasure. Now, the thing is, it's going to be very well guarded, and this is the thing. A group of kind of lowly bandits are going to be very unlikely to be able to beat these guards unless something happens, the once-in-a-lifetime thing that creates the big score. So suppose you had a secret mission. You had two kingdoms. They were going to come to a secret alliance. So one kingdom was going to pay the other one, but they're doing this in secret. So they have this huge treasure, and they disguise it as a merchant caravan, but heavily guarded. And they start heading off to this city, and they go along a road. And maybe this is an area where a bandit gang, they harass travelers, they, demand a toll or whatever. But ordinarily, if they saw all these guards and whatnot, they'd just be like, leave these guys alone. But a band of gnolls attacks the caravan, and the guards dispatch the gnolls, but it's a very savage battle. They're very injured or whatever, and they decide instead of going back, they're going to try to make a run to point B, and this is where the bandits run into them. Now, this is all information you as the GM have. Salazin and his group, they don't know any of this about the treaty, about the gnolls. They see that the guards have been injured or whatever. Now, maybe if you're going to set this up, if Salazin over the years tries to do research on this, what was his treasure about, maybe he can discover something. But basically, this as a GM, you're thinking about this to make it plausible that this treasure is in this spot where Salazin and his group can attack it. And what Salazin says is when they attack the caravan, the guards fight to the death. Even when the bandits know they have the battle won, they try to get these guys to surrender, they won't, because they don't want to lose the king's treasure, right? So Salazin and his group, they kill them to a man. They open up the wagons, and they realize, oh my God, look at this treasure. And I would suggest that in addition to, gold and silver and, platinum, gems and jewels, art treasures, whatever it is, put some kind of unique magic on it. I'm thinking like a weapon with sentience, because I think this is going to lend itself to later on when Salazin is the sole survivor, his paranoia, his fear of discovery, his decline into madness. All right, so when Salazin and his crew realize, oh my God, look at the size of this treasure, it is a poison pill treasure, they decide, you know what, we need to just take this off the road. They go into the forest, they go into their hideout area to decide what to do. And here is where they start to run into trouble. Half the group says, let's just split the treasure, all amongst ourselves, every man for himself. I'm getting out of here. I'm going back to town. I'm going here. I'm going there. The other half says, no, we can't do that. If you guys start spending, there's items here that are very clearly from some treasure. The gold pieces are stamped in such a way. We need to hang on to this treasure. We need to hide it and wait it out. And of course, a battle ensues. So the group that wants to split up the treasure and leave are killed. But in fact, it's a bloody battle and only 3 of the other group remain, Salazin and 2 others. Well, now there's no way that they can transport this treasure or whatever, so they have to hide it. And what he says is they think they have a perfect location because they know of a set of sea caves where the only way you can get in and out is at low tide. So they hide the treasure in a sea cave, but that's all Salazin tells us about it. He doesn't talk about its location in the narrative. So after leaving the forest, Salazin tells us that soon enough they are attacked by orcs and his 2 companions are killed and he barely makes it away. Injured, he drags himself to the town of Dramos. And he tells himself over the months and then years, he's going to go back to get the treasure. He wants to get it, but he becomes paranoid. He doesn't want to tell anyone about it because he's afraid they'll steal it. And then he begins to think this treasure is cursed. He remembers this weapon, this item that seemed to, probe into his mind. And so he becomes a recluse. He begins to move from flophouse to flophouse, always on the run. But he remains obsessed by this treasure and what happened to him. And he starts writing about it and writing. And he rewrites his manuscript over like 30 years, over and over, which lends itself, this burning desire to tell his story and everything. And he does have this sort of untapped literary talent to creating a great work of art. And in fact, commentators have said, this was the treasure of Salazin, not this, thing that half the people don't even believe in. It's this book. Because it combines a history of the continent, this adventure, this urchin, and all the, human, all too human frailties of, loyalty and betrayal, mistrust, and the sense that somehow greed, creates its own evil. And here you have the basis for a treasure map that's glued into the pages of a book. Because Salazin's desire to tell this story, but his paranoia, he has this map, he does want to find the treasure. When he gets old, he realizes he's never going to do it, he puts it in there. But he can't resist trying to hide it. So in the book, the device is, he tells the reader that the secret to the treasure lies between 2 geographic points that he mentions in his narrative. And in this example, I'll use Mount Graven and the Crystal Falls. And in fact, in this location that Graven had visited, there are noted sea caves all along this peninsula. Now, the problem is it's a very remote area of the continent, as you can see, and many of the readers commented that, well, why would there be a caravan of such riches going in this area? There doesn't seem to be roads or anything. But, others have said, this is what he said, this is, Salazin, and they've gone and they've searched, they've looked in these sea caves and found nothing. And it's a very dangerous area to be in. Why does he do this? Because his description of Mount Graven is on page 129 of his manuscript, and his description of the Crystal Falls is on page 130. And this is a handwritten document, one side only. So on the back of page 129, Salazin has pasted his map. And the map points to sea caves all the way up here. And these, of course, were along the road to the now ruined city of Anholf, which is where this, caravan, this poison pill treasure came from. All right, so now you've got a plausible setup to have this treasure map glued into the book. It has to be the original book. The question is, how do the players come across it? Remember, there are countless copies out there. Children learn to read from this book, Everyone knows about the story of Salazin and the treasure. And everyone knows about the inconsistencies in the various copies. So people are searching for the original book, looking at the age of the page and looking for clues because it's the holy grail for the treasure seekers. And if you wanted to, you could just have the players find the copy, in an old library or a temple, and they go somewhere and they do some research and they go, oh my God, it's the original book. To me, that's awfully convenient and kind of boring. So if you want to come up with something more realistic for the story I told, think about the first people that came across this book, the original. The owner of the, flop house where Salazin was staying, the tenant that she gave it to, and that first buyer in the tavern that bought it for a few copper pieces. So let's say that the owner of this rooming house was interviewed decades later. It became famous that she was the one who, found Salazin's manuscript. And so she's asked, what was he like? And this and that. And she says, oh, he was totally crazy. He used to sit in his room at night, talk to no one. He claimed people, invisible things were trying to get at him. And she mentions that he would draw a symbol on, any portal, on the doors and the windows. He kept the shutters always closed. And he claimed this symbol that he had seen in the treasure on this magic sword that bedeviled him would protect him. And he said to her one time, I've put these symbols on the pages of my book, but when she looked, they were never seen. And he said, well, there's a way to see them. Now, again, the classic invisible ink sort of thing is you put a flame very carefully so that you don't burn the page. And of course, this is the way to see the symbol, and this tells you that it's the original manuscript. So the players are then approached by a merchant who is also a treasure aficionado, and he says, I'd like you to accompany me. There's an auction, and there's a very old copy of Salazin's book. They go to this auction, and there's an NPC there who begins bidding against the merchant, but the merchant wins. The NPC is clearly pissed off about this, him and his henchmen or whatever, right? So the merchant says, hey, could you guys just keep this book for me? I'm a little nervous about it. And of course, the next day, the merchant is found murdered, and his, bookshop or, his lodgings or whatever have been totally ransacked. Somebody was searching for something, and it was worth killing for. So now the players know that somebody wants this book. Could this be the original book? Can they figure this out? Can they go and do the research? And once they do that, can they figure out that the map is pasted under page 129? And if so, they are on their way to find one of the most celebrated treasures in all the known world. Yes, my friend, the game's afoot. All right, so next time I'm going to draw this map. I'm going to make, I think, 2 different maps, sort of a general one and then one of the sea caves and whatnot. But until then, if you like what you've seen, please subscribe. I always want more. I really like to hear your comments. I love to, read them and respond. And of course, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.